Hi everyone, what an amazing 2 days, and I just want to reiterate what Mike said. It really takes a village to put this on, and just a huge thank you to everybody that has been involved and to everybody that has given up their time to be with us. So I hope you're all as excited as I am for what's next. It is my pleasure to introduce someone who is not just a leader, but a true trailblazer in the world of tech and philanthropy, Vilas Dar. Vilas is an entrepreneur, a technologist, a human rights advocate, and a leading global voice on equity in a tech-enabled world. He's the president of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, an organisation that is doing remarkable work, dedicated to pushing the boundaries of what AI and data can do to make our world a better place. Now, when we talk about the McGovern Foundation, we're talking big impact. They are bringing some of the smartest, most innovative ideas to life, and that's in large part to Vilas's expertise in the field and his collaborative approach and very creative leadership. So please join me in this last session and welcome Vilas Dar to the stage. Thank you.
Lovely.
Vilas.
Hi, everyone.
It is fantastic to have you with us, and perhaps just as a start, could you tell people a little bit about the Patrick Foundation?
Sure, and let me just start by echoing Mike. I just want to thank you, Kate, to thank Brad, to thank the entire team, to thank Debbie for this incredible gathering. I was reflecting on the fact that as we think about technology and nonprofits, there's not really anything like this out there. And I'm so happy to see so many of our partners here, Microsoft's partners, and an incredible community coming together. So thank you for that. The Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. Well, look, we're at the end of a couple of days, and I always start with optimism. Our foundation is grounded in the sense that I think a better world is possible. I think at the combination of human innovation and our shared brilliance and our shared empathy, we can do something great. And I know that feels almost like, well, why is he even saying that? Of course we believe that, but we don't name it often enough. It's too easy to get stuck in the stories of, well, how is AI going to kill us all? We'll come back and talk about that a bit more, or all of the other pieces. But remember that the core of, I think, all of our shared work is a shared sense that we can do better. So we take that and apply it to the incident case. I think two things. One is AI is the next in a set of technological revolutions that have immensely expanded our capacity to do. Now that's where that sentence ends. To do things, to do better corporate interactions and profitability, to build more optimal supply chains to get things to consumers, to better manipulate voters in an election, to do a lot of things. And there's a bit of a missing middle in that conversation. We've got the fears, we've got the short-term pieces around making sure that these tools aren't biased or representative or fair or transparent, and making sure that we slow down and get those things right. There's the long-term fears, existential risk, the boondoggles and distractions that are out there that sometimes take us away from what we should be paying attention to. And then there's the missing middle. There's the piece that says there are real problems that are facing humanity today. And if we invested capital and public trust and technical competency, we could build solutions at scale for a whole set of things that, unfortunately, the private sector isn't thinking about as a priority, and the governments simply aren't capable of.
So can you say a little bit then about what is your unique approach to grant making?
Yeah, so one of the terms that we've used recently has become very kind of trendy is proximate, right? I have this deep conviction that nonprofits are proximate to problems, and that's what we often put a responsibility on nonprofit leaders to do. You have to understand communities and you know their problems. I think of it slightly differently. I know that in the communities that I grew up in and that we work with, when somebody faces a disaster or a crisis, they know the person from the nonprofit that comes and helps them deal with the moment in time. They know who's providing healthcare. They know who's providing economic opportunity. But if nonprofits are proximate to the problem, very rarely do we also create the resources to have them be proximate to the solution. And what I mean about that is in a world of AI and technology, we say to nonprofits, here is your mission, massive and at scale. But in order to figure out how to do it, you have to go somewhere else to figure out a technology solution. You have to go and buy a product and adapt it to your needs. You have to go and wonder if you're going to get enough compute or data to build a solution that works for you. So the Foundation's approach to this is to say, let's lessen the distance, let's bridge the divide between communities and the nonprofits that serve them and the technological capacity necessary to create solutions. We do three things. We have a grant-making program that helps organizations build an internal fluency around data and AI. We have an in-house team who support nonprofits in these long-term journeys, not just building products, but helping everybody from boards and CEOs to frontline outcome drivers understand what AI is and why it should be used in the organization. And we have a small team in-house that actually builds AI products at scale. The last product we created helped small newsrooms across America use generative AI to repurpose investigative journalism. We think there's a space for tech companies that are wholly owned by civil society, by groups like the ones in this room, to build products that actually center dignity and justice and community participation.
I just want to pick on one thing that you said around working with boards, just because it's something over the last 2 days that I've heard a lot of people comment on the need for more education for boards around AI. Can you say a little bit more about how do you work with boards in this way?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're putting your finger right on it, right? Is that this really shouldn't be a conversation about technology. It should be a conversation about what our organizations are intended to do and how tools like AI can be used to promote them. That conversation has to start with boards and management teams who have to start with a basic understanding of what these tools represent. Because let's be honest, as much as ChatGPT, that wonderful product, and everything else about generative AI has been in the headlines, we still haven't had a reckoning really across our sector to understand the next step, the use cases that really will drive transformed responses to disaster relief, to driving healthcare outcomes at population scale. And boards need to have an understanding of what that looks like, not merely as, hey, we're gonna check the box on one more program, we're gonna apply for one more grant. But what does it mean for an organization that's trying to deliver on those outcomes on a 5, 10, or 20-year cycle? We think there's multiple ways they do that. One is relying on their own teams, right, where there's a lot of knowledge about this already, about what's happening on the front lines. It's looking to funders to actually do a little bit of that translation work. We can't ask every nonprofit out there to spin up their own learning and development curriculums. And looking to partners like corporate partners who can actually provide those services at scale. To say, look, here are exemplars, here are pathways, and then here's the actual day-to-day work that it takes to get proficient on and build strategy around these tools.
No, it's so important. As a leader in AI ethics and global policy, including your work with the UN High-Level Advisory Board that, I think that's how you know Natasha.
That's right.
How do you see the current trends in AI policy shaping the future for nonprofits and civil society?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm concerned, Kate, that the conversation about AI policy is being led by the same people who led our policy discussions about the internet, about social media. I'm not gonna say it's the wrong people, but I'm saying not enough of the right people are at the table, right? There's plenty of research out there and plenty of stories that say if we had designed social media in different ways, we might have actually seen fundamentally different outcomes around strengths of democracies, around the mental health issues that young people are facing and so many other things. So this is my hope. When I saw kind of the invitations to AI summits that have been all across the news and we saw who was speaking there, the people who were noticeably absent were the people who were proximate to communities. The people who recognize that the problems that many of us face are never going to be solved as a matter of institutional policy or large-scale companies. I'll give you one example. I was with some new friends recently who shared with me the problem that their communities face. And Kate, it was drunken elephants. Not the conversation I intended to have at a forum on AI ethics. They shared with me that drunken elephants go out in the forest, they eat a lot of fermenting fruit, they get a little loopy, they decide to have a good time. And unfortunately, a drunken elephant's idea of a good time is we're gonna go and rampage through some rice fields and have a little snack. Well, it sounds funny, but unfortunately for subsistence farmers across much of South Asia, like this is a real threat. And they said, you know what, we needed a solution to fix this. And AI was maybe an unlikely but incredibly efficient solution. They built a tool running locally on Raspberry Pis that uses machine learning, some of the work that Fei-Fei was talking about earlier on stage, to identify when an elephant's approaching and drive a super low-cost, light-based deterrent system for elephants. It required really incredible advances in machine learning and algorithmic design, but at the end of the day, this entire solution cost a few tens of dollars and could be deployed now across hundreds of thousands of acres. It's the perfect example of where AI actually intersects with people's lives and vulnerability in a way that matters, that has to be owned by communities. And coming back to the AI ethics conversation, I'm happy to say that I think we're moving in the direction of more inclusion, slowly but surely. You mentioned the UN High-Level Advisory Board that I sit on with Natasha. Incredible work. And then UNESCO's work around building assessment methodologies that go to actual countries and say, what do you need as a starting point? Where does this take us? Well, I think in many ways, it takes us from a conversation about how we regulate a technology. I think we've all heard people talk about ethical AI, right? I have to tell you, I've been an AI scientist for 20 plus years. Like, I don't care about ethical AI. It doesn't mean anything to me. But if we can have a conversation about building an ethical society that's empowered by AI, that brings technology professionals into a room with civil society, with community leaders, with government officials, and says, what are we designing for? That gives me a lot of hope.
Feifei said earlier today that, and it really resonated with me, at the end of the day, there's nothing artificial about AI, about artificial intelligence, it's about people. And Natasha said as well, it's important to remember that AI systems are built by people, for people, and I think this is very much what you're saying now. But as we all know, there's some people in communities that are not as represented as they should be. So, in all these conversations about equity and AI, we've explored challenges of inclusion and trying to address that gap. But can you just say a little bit more about what are the voices and perspectives that are critical to enriching our AI for good ecosystem that we're trying to build, and perhaps also how can we proactively incorporate these voices?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we talk a lot about making sure nobody's left behind, and I don't think we talk enough about who's doing the leaving behind, right? So I think there's two parts to your question. One is, how do we make sure that rather than a top-down approach that says, hey, we do skills development and training programs, we instead center communities' interests in saying, what are the problems you're trying to solve, and what do you need to be able to solve them? I had this amazing experience, Kate. I went out to South Dakota and spent some time on a Lakota reservation. And I'll spare you the long story, but the short version of it is we brought about 15 kids who had never coded in their life. And over the course of 3 weeks, they built an app. And here's what the app did. I'm just going to give you the 2 lines on it. With an ethnobotanist, we took them out into traditional Lakota lands, and they did data collection and took pictures of plants that were culturally significant to the Lakota people. And they built an app using very basic machine learning and machine vision where you could take it with you on a hike and you could take a picture of a plant. And it would do 3 things. It would identify the plant. Itself kind of an amazing thing for a bunch of 14 to 16-year-olds that have never coded before to do in 3 weeks. It would figure out what the plant was and tell you what its name was in English. Okay, that's a start. Then the second thing it would do is it would tell you what the name of that plant was in Lakota, a language that many of these kids had always been fascinated by, had heard their elders speak, but never had a traditional mechanism to go out and learn the language. And the third, aspirationally, was to get to a database of Lakota myths that might have had that plant show up in a meaningful way. And this simple act of walking through traditional lands and canyons became an experience where I walked with them, and the amount of excitement and exuberance and just amazing potential that was there as they walked through rediscovering their own traditions and stories. So how do we do this? Well, Indigigenius, an organization of indigenous AI scientists. Hidden Genius Project, a program that's training young black men across the country. Technovation, that we are partnering with to train 20 million women and girls in AI literacy over the next 10 years. These are programs that are being centered and driven by communities first. And then we're really excited to bring in partners, those who hold technological competency, who hold kind of all of the other pieces that are necessary. But I think we have to start from that fundamental question. Who are we designing for? Okay, that's the first one. Then who's doing the design? Who owns that? And who actually is driving where we're putting resources? I feel like we would switch the pyramid around a little bit and say, let's actually start from the problems we're trying to solve and the people who need to solve them, and then figure out how we push resources to that. We could do a lot of good.
I think that's just great advice about how to take sort of some of the conceptual things that we've talked about into practice, is to ask those questions. In one of the sessions earlier today, I can't remember who it was, but I loved it when they talked about greater productivity does not translate to greater prosperity. And clearly people and everybody in this room is going to play a pivotal role in helping to address that issue. You've passionately discussed the untapped potential of nonprofits in helping to shape our AI future. Can you share a little bit more about the vision that you have for how these organisations can be empowered by AI in more ways?
Absolutely, and I'll share with you, it's a vision, not one that I have, but one that we've created together with many of the partners in this room. I think there's a 3-step process, and I feel like even in the conversations over the last few days, I've heard many of you say you are on this journey. The first is using AI to figure out internal operations. Right, those pieces that seem like they're low-hanging fruit, we want to make sure we streamline our fundraising capacity, our understanding of donor management. I think the next step of that becomes using some of these incredible generative AI tools to tell better stories, to better engage our communities. I think that's a starting point. But I think there's something much more fundamental that happens once you build that core proficiency, which is to recognize that these tools are much more than a better way to connect to those who fund you. They're actually an incredible way to transform how you drive your programmatic work. Stories, and I'll spare you because I have 100 of these, right? But stories like being able to use machine learning and data analytics to transform population-level health, to understand infant mortality for 500,000 women in northwestern India, and over the course of 6 months drive an intervention that materially changes the rate of infant mortality. That's one example among 100. Where are those tools being built, and who are they being built by? Well, very rarely are they people who are taking things off a shelf and saying, I'm going to go deploy this in the field. Instead, they're co-designed by really brilliant people. I think one of those organizations is maybe here in the room, Cushy Baby. There we go, right here up front. And Odair, another amazing organization that's here in the room, that are actually investing in building internal technological, not just competence, but mastery. To not say, hey, we have a problem and we're going to build a product to solve it, but rather we have a technological opportunity. Let's figure out what all of the problems our communities face that we can solve are. And the third is the final part of this, which I think is the most critical. If we optimize our internal operations, we figure out how to drive programmatic impact, then the third and the most critical part is when civil society has a voice in the public conversation about AI. That's more than just, hey, what might happen in 20 years, but this is what we're seeing happens when you take AI and you deploy it in the places where vulnerability is most present. We should be taking that and feeding that back into the guidance we give to our technology companies, to our innovators and our leaders, and say, these are the things we need you to work on, and here are the things we need to build more protection around. For civil society to become a primary architect of AI policy, of AI ethics in the world, that's the hope and inspiration of where we could get to.
Can you share some, as a funder, can you perhaps share some innovative ways that you think that nonprofits could leverage AI to not only enhance their work, as we've just talked about, but also make a compelling case to funders?
Well, I'm going to turn that around again. I'm a reluctant philanthropist, right? I mean, I believe deeply in generosity, and I'm not necessarily somebody who will defend the institutions of how funding happens. I don't think that responsibility should be on the nonprofits in the room. I think funders have to get real smart, real fast. And I'll tell you the second part of that, which is if funders aren't, then I think funders are violating their own moral compact to actually be at the forefront of a transformation that's going to affect power across the planet. There should not be a single funder in the world today that isn't trying to figure out how AI can equip and support their nonprofits that they partner with, and are trying to understand how this is going to impact basic dignity and equity across the communities that they say that they support. And I think that transformation has to happen within the next 12 months.
Hearing a lot of clapping in the room. I've got a couple more questions, but also, Phyllis, we can take some questions in the room. So perhaps while I ask this next one, I think there's some microphones there if anyone has any questions. So, Phyllis, it's very clear that over the last 2 days, there's a lot of change makers in the room. We've had a lot of change makers online, have had a lot of ideas for how AI can help achieve their missions and advance their missions. And for those of us that have been deeply engaged in this space, we very much know that we've only captured like a fraction of these ideas, and that there's an incredible lot of innovation out there in the sector. you travel the world some crazy number of days per year. You meet with a lot of people, you have a lot of conversations, you're meeting with a lot of communities. What are some of the ideas or prototypes that you're seeing that really excite you the most? I mean, I think you've spoken about a number of them, but I also know that you believe firmly in the power of storytelling, and that we need to do a lot more of that actually in this space to highlight a lot of the incredible work that's already being done.
Yeah, I think there's an incredible library of interventions that have come out in the space of disaster response, right? When we entered into this work right in the early days of COVID, we worked with Team Rubicon, who I think is here in the room today, to think about how we built better information systems to understand how vaccines were being distributed. That work actually started an entire line of activities that we've done that have worked with many of the organizations in this room to say, you know what, there is an entire transformation of how we think about resilience, prediction, and response to crisis and trauma. To think about the fact that we can use predictive models to do things like help very small local communities understand what the risk of a landslide is. And now I'm talking about communities that include rural villages of 500 people using AI tools that, again, there's no commercial provider for, but that civil society is able to help them build. All the way through to a project we're doing with the UN and a number of other groups called Disha that says, let's do predictive analytics at scale and help every organization that's involved in disaster recovery coordinate and more efficiently deliver services. But what I'll say to you, Kate, is the questions that I think are being asked are much more powerful than the responses we've already seen. Because when we're able to re-envision not just how do we do what we do today better, but how do these tools give us an insight into understanding maybe why the things we've been doing haven't been the most powerful responses. In the context of disaster response, we've done some projects that have shown that using telecom data that helps us understand how people move in the time immediately before and after a disaster, the ways that they respond are actually very different from what traditional models of disaster response have said. That sometimes the order in which we bring in different kinds of supplies or stand up things like payment networks actually matter a lot. And now we're able to have a better insight into understanding exactly what that sequence is and fundamentally transform our ability to deliver that kind of outcome.
No, I love that, and it's it's about how to leverage AI to get those greater insights. I heard somebody say yesterday, what you don't want to do is use AI just to do the wrong thing faster, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
I see we have a question here in the room.
Hi, Vilas. My name is Leanne DeLizer. I run Computer Science for All, and I want to thank you for your continued support of us and our organization and your inspirational words today. What I'm hearing from you is a real shift from a perspective that a lot of us in this room and even the opening package here of this notion of skilling for careers. And what you're really talking about is a shift from this idea that AI or even technological literacy is not something that should be our goal, it should be fluency. We should be looking for a citizenry across the landscape, no matter what industry or sector they work on, who can fluently use these tools. How does that change our perspective as nonprofits as we partner with education or do work in education ourselves? And how can we help not just keep playing catch up with these skilling tools, but really get this into the fundamental literacies and fluencies we want kids to have?
It's a fantastic question, Leanne. Thank you. I'm reminded, I think at Davos a couple of years ago, I was asked a question that was something like, how do we get the people who have power to give it up? And my response was, you don't. You build your own power. In many ways, the shift that I want to propose to the people in this room is not that you should think of skilling around AI to become better users of these products, but rather as a journey to become architects of what an AI-enabled future looks like. To step into the fact that you understand communities and their needs as well as they do, and not nearly in the way that the product providers do. Which means that you need to become not just users, but advocates. And with good partners, build the kinds of tools that actually reshape these conversations. You and I had an amazing conversation. If you don't mind, I'll share just a little bit of it, right? The sense that what's happening now around AI and education is a first wave of solutions that are coming out, funded often by private capital, that are about capturing the market. Let's get an AI-enabled tutor out there as quickly as possible. What's sometimes missing when that happens is the pedagogy of decades of research that, well before AI came along, helped us understand more about how to help kids learn, about the kinds of techniques and practices that would lead to really great pedagogy. Who holds that? In some ways, academia, but in many more ways, the civil society organizations that have been doing the supplemental work. Our teachers, our superintendents, our principals. Those individuals and communities need to step forward and say, we want to own what it looks like when AI intersects with education and shape and drive the tools that will actually help us do that.
Hi, I can listen to Vilas for the rest of the year. He is so, right? He is so good. Thank you so much, really.
You're very nice.
Thank you so much. So my name is Frederic Nonga. I live in California. I am the founder and CEO of SIAP Africa. I am a lawyer, so I came here yesterday. I am so happy that I came here, but I'm going back maybe with 1%. Because why? I'm going to Africa in 2 weeks. One of the things that I really is bothering me right now is how can I use AI, AP, whatever you call it, to help an African woman who wakes up in the morning, she finds a lump on her breast, and then she would like to know what is the roadmap for me not to die, right? What is the roadmap of that woman who has a lump? She doesn't know what an oncologist means. She doesn't know what. So how can we use the tools to help that woman to survive instead of dying? And then the other project I have in mind right now is mental illness in Africa. We don't talk about it, right? It's taboo. I would like to change that because many young men and women in Africa, they just send them back home when you are acting up in school. How can I use all these tools? And also for my own organization, 15 countries. I'm not the UN, but it seems like I have the UN on my head. And it seems like AI is really the tool that I need. But I need a mentor because, once again, I'm a lawyer. I don't have any IT background. I need a mentor who can hold my hand and telling me, you know what, all this spreadsheet that you have, because sometimes I look at my spreadsheet, I just start crying. I need somebody who can help me really to know this is how you can put all these 15 countries together, education, healthcare, disaster responses, breast cancer or whatever program we have, to put that together for more efficiency. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Well, I'll tell you, the only offer I can make you is I'm happy to hold your hand and we'll go look for that mentor together because I'm looking for that person too. But beyond that answer, I mean, I think your first question was so powerful, right? And again, I look at the framing of it and I say there's a lot that we could share around the tools and products that are out there, many of them being led by people in this room. There are questions of bias and there's an issue particularly around breast cancer, where many of the models that have been trained in medical systems are trained on global north data. And when we've actually deployed and implemented them with our partners in various parts of the world, we find they don't work. That's a conversation for another time, but let me actually say something to you about your question that I found so moving. Is not so much what are the products and what are the pathways to figuring out what the solution is, but why don't we live in a world where people feel empowered and have the agency to recognize that they can find a path to that answer? Why do billions of people on this planet still feel like whatever's happening around AI has nothing to do with them? That's the problem we should be fixing. We should be thinking about these tools as a way to create more agency and ownership, to support fundamental dignity, to make the world feel like what's happening around AI is something that's a shared human experience. And I believe that the people in this room and that civil society can actually do that, can move the solution closer to the problems and make us all feel like we have a voice in what happens with these tools.
So I think we have time for one more question.
It's more of a comment really about the last 2 days that we spent together. I think that we've got really excited about the potential that AI brings to the work that we do collectively in the community. But my only comment is that there's a barrier to entry for not-for-profit to join the bandwagon, so to speak, and the licensing fees to add Copilot to our Office package is like 400% plus in licensing fees. And so that's a financial cost that a lot of us are going to have a hard time being able to bear. And so we're going to start slow, but I'm really hoping that Microsoft will come up with some pricing for not-for-profit that's going to make it easier.
Can I say one thing about this, and I'll maybe turn it over to you? Or I just have one comment here, which is fully agreed. But the one thing that I find real hope around here is this launch of a space for nonprofits to share what they've learned and best practices that condense that curve. And so this community for nonprofits that's being launched, the spaces that we have formally and informally to actually engage and to understand that these are not solitary journeys is, I think, going to be a massive transformation for the sector to be able to work together.
No, I'll just add one point onto that as well, is that, I think the way that Copilot is being built into the Microsoft suite of products is a way that you can actually start taking advantages of some of the new capabilities like right now. And actually, I know that there's a lot of nonprofits in the room as well who are, who are not currently are using Microsoft products, and we have some free offerings as well. So I think if you go to the platform, that's where you can learn a little bit more about those offers as well. So, Vilas, we're out of time, but I just wanted to ask one final question. How do you think that we can? What's something really practical that we can take away? Like, how can we find a common ground and forge a unified path forward in how we think about how AI can be really leveraged for people and communities around the world. I mean, Shamina from MasterCard earlier said, she really had a call to action. Like, if we're here in a year's time, what are we going to be able to say that we have done? And what do you hope that we can say that we have done?
Yeah, I love that question. Two things that I'll say on this. One is AI is just our next bite at the apple. It's not the last one. We had the internet, we had social media, now we have AI. Every one of these has been an opportunity for civil society to step in and say, we're going to use these tools to transform our fundamental sense of what equity and justice look like. So if we talk about what we're specifically going to do, I think two things that have to happen. We have to change this conversation from AI is something that is being created for us and that we use to something that we are creating together in benefit of humanity at scale. And the second is we have to move from those short-term easy wins of we're going to buy a product and implement it to ask the question, what's our organization's strategy in an AI-enabled world? And how do we actually use these tools to fundamentally transform how we serve the people we care about most?
Well, I couldn't think of a better way to close this one out, and I think I speak for everybody in the room that we appreciate your leadership and your voice. So please join me.
Well, thank you all.
Thanking Vilas.
Really nice to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
take care. Take care. Thank you.